So this is Eric Hess, the Encrypted Economy, which you already know, and we're back from Labor Day, and we kick it off with United Arab Emirates. I'm really excited about what's going on in United Arab Emirates. It's an area that I've been following because of their approach to regulation. Unlike other areas where there's a lack of clarity, I won't name any names, United States, SEC. In the United Arab Emirates, they are endeavoring to put forth a cohesive regulatory regime that encourages innovation, take heed, as well as provides a framework within which businesses can operate in. So it's sort of exciting to see what they're doing. There's a lot going on there, and we dive into it a little bit in this podcast. Now, it's not a market the size of the United States, so the absorption capacity isn't there, but you are seeing a lot of bigger exchanges there. You are seeing efforts to get different regulators off the ground, and they're still staffing up, but nonetheless, very exciting time to be there. So we're going to cover a couple of acronyms that are covered throughout the podcast. First, the United Arab Emirates is, go figure, a number of emirates that are united. Two of the big ones that we focus on for the purposes of this podcast are Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And each of Abu Dhabi and Dubai have their own kind of like provincial or state regulators, if you would, if you're comparing it to the United States. And then there's also sort of a national regulator. At the national level, there's a Securities and Commodities Authority known as ESCA. At the Emirate level, you have the Dubai Financial Services Authority and the Financial Services Regulatory Authority, the latter being Abu Dhabi. And amongst all this, you have a new regulation that's supposed to sort of weave all these together, which is the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, known as VARA. So we talk about that on the podcast, but I'll just start off with there for now so you have something to digest before we jump into it on the podcast. So very excited to bring this to you. And if you like this podcast, obviously share it. I'm excited to sort of try to start hitting some additional jurisdictions as we move into the fall and start to observe digital asset regulation in other jurisdictions around the world. So with that, I bring you Kokila Alagh of KARM Legal. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the Encrypted Economy, a weekly podcast featuring discussions exploring the business, laws, regulation, security, and technologies relating to digital assets and data. I am Eric Hess, founder of Hess Legal Counsel. I've spent decades representing regulated exchanges, broker-dealers, investment advisors, and all matter of fintech companies for all things touching electronic trading, with a focus on new and developing technologies. So today I have Kokila Alagh, founder of KARM Legal Consultants, UAE-based law firm. Kokila has a lot of experience with regards to digital asset regulation in the UAE, amongst other things. She's sort of cutting edge in technology and IP, and you name it. She's got her, first-rate firm helping founders discover UAE or to not discover, but to launch new businesses. There's been a lot. Well, first of all, welcome. Thanks for joining the podcast. I'm like launching into it. So I know Kokila for a while, but I actually had the pleasure of meeting her in person at Consensus just a couple of weeks ago. It was wonderful to talk to you. And of course, she comes back and whenever she comes, she told me before the podcast, whenever she comes back to UAE after going abroad, she always has a bit of a cold. So she's a powerhouse. She's powering through it today, but there might be a little bit of coughing, there might be a little sneezing, but you're a powerhouse. So welcome to the Encrypted Economy.
Thank you. Quite excited.
There's been a bit of a rotation with regards to digital asset projects. There's some VCs that are stepping back, but that's not happening in UAE. A lot of the projects are going to UAE to get funding because UAE is doing better. There's more petro dollars flowing into UAE, and they want to deploy it. Which is not to say open season on UAE, but there's been definitely more money moving from UAE into crypto relative to other areas flowing into crypto. And I think it's going to represent, I think, an interesting rotation that's going to play out not just this year, but potentially for the next couple of years as well. That's, again, that's a bit uneducated, but based on what I'm seeing, that definitely seems like it's going to be a trend. But you're the expert. You're there. You see it. So why don't we start off talking about you and how UAE has sort of grown into the digital asset space, its significance, current trends, and then we'll get into the exciting stuff of why it's a good country in terms of regulation. So
Absolutely. No. So, firstly, I'm not an expert. I'm learning and unlearning on a daily basis, still trying to understand this whole crypto space. It's a beautiful mind space that I say as a lawyer. I'm very fortunate to be in the middle of this space. So, interestingly, why UAE is a great place. One, there's just one answer to it, as that the vision of the entire country is very forward focused. So the rulers, the his highnesses that we have in the country have always thought about what will make UAE world apart, class apart, and how can we attract more and more people to come and either invest in UAE, or how UAE can be the global leader in what they do. So, with that, the whole drive towards technology adoption started when UAE, we're a very young country. And when we started looking at developing, with focusing more on infrastructure, real estate. So, not just an oil and gas economy, we're known for our real estate, we're known for the infrastructure that the country has, we're known for tourism, real estate growth, and now the technology adoption that we have. One of the most remarkable things for you to keep in mind that when the whole world was still talking about understanding what's Bitcoin, what's blockchain, in 2016, Dubai actually came out with the first blockchain policy. And they came out with 6 to 7 different principles on how blockchain as a technology would be adopted. There was this big statement by His Highness saying that Dubai by 2021 will be a completely blockchain driven Emirates. And to somewhere we have reached, I would say, that level of success is that when you talk here to layman and to everybody across, everybody's aware of it. So it's not that, okay, the country wise, we're just talking about one segment that knows what's cryptocurrency, what's Bitcoin, what's happening in the world, but they're all aware of what is blockchain, what can it do for you, what it can bring to you as a business owner, as a service provider, as an educational institute, the students, everybody is aware of it. So you have pretty much the entire country talking in a similar language. So the adaption is there. There is a force and a drive from the government. So the market suitability plays a very large role. And then majorly, I'm going to talk about what to top this all is a strong regulatory framework and the legal framework that we have around it. So I'd say we pretty much tick all boxes for use case of any new emerging tech, like we're talking about this whole blockchain space.
right, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the businesses like exchanges that are moving into UAE, the big ones. I mean, if you want to have a presence in the space, attacking this market and siting here seems to be a very wise move. I mean, you have Binance, you have FTX, you have Kraken now. We'll get into that a little bit into the podcast. But all right. So, and what about you? Like, how did you end up coming to embracing or working on digital assets? Like, what was that evolution like?
Yes, so that's a bit of a story, and I like to tell that story. Is that I have waited these many years for for blockchain to be found, because I did my master's in digital economy law, with my main thesis being in cryptography and digital signatures and electronic contracts laws. And this is I'm talking about in 2003 from Monash University in Melbourne, fresh out of law school, and I was like, the whole world's ready to discuss e-money. We're talking not e-commerce, but we're talking about contracts being signed digitally, use of digital signatures. How does that work? How does that function works? How is it legally secured? How the OECD guidelines that came out help these frameworks? But it's taken almost 16 years for me to get back into this space. So, so yes, it's a spot where I'm in, where I can say the intellectual side of me is very happy to be back into this space. In between 15 years, I've been here in Dubai. The 15 years between, I was saying, from when I finished my masters and the time I went back into the whole tech space, I was a corporate commercial lawyer here based out of UAE. I was managing partner of a bigger Emirati UAE national law firm and focusing mainly on corporate commercial law. But in 2017, when I reviewed a white paper for a client who was investing in a coin being issued from US, and I was like, okay, now we're talking about something that I believed and I studied in. I was late to the party, not right in the beginning in 2011, 2012, when Bitcoin's the Bitcoin white paper came out, and I could have talked about it. But with that, yes, I decided that I want to set up a law firm. I want to work as a consultant in this space with the main motive about bringing more awareness around this space, getting more and more lawyers into this space to embrace it, to start talking about it to their clients. And I've always believed in the vision that Dubai had. So in 2017, when I started reading about it, coincidentally, ADGM, one of our financial free zones, actually came out with their guidelines for ICOs and talked about utility tokens. So where the world was still struggling between understanding what it is, here we had regulators who were coming out already with guidelines on what one can do and one cannot do. So with that, I got deep into it, and in 2018 I started my own legal practice here under the name of KARM Legal Consultants. And we're a law firm, as we say, that it's mandatory. It's every mandate that we work on is in this space of emerging tech. Blockchain being the most common one. So most of our clients are in this space. In that, we've just recently calculated, we've done legal analysis of more than 220 tokens that have the clients who have approached us. We've looked at their white papers, the light papers, the technology decks, and tried to understand what this token could be if it was to be issued in UAE or if it was to be issued from outside UAE in any other jurisdiction which the client wants us to explore. So with that, we've started understanding how these different types of tokens work. We've also been very fortunate to work with a lot of intermediary service providers in the crypto blockchain space. So some of the names that you take, the exchanges who are coming here, we've been fortunate to work with them and see how they have grown and progressed here, especially here in UAE. So overall, the journey ever since I started KARM, we're a very young law firm. We will be 4 years old in August. We're quite excited to be in this space. I must say we're a team of around 18 of us, 14 lawyers and 4 paralegals working with us. And everybody's very passionate and dedicated to this space.
Well, you say you were late to the party, but actually you were early to the party. It was just 5 o'clock, and they hadn't even put out the punch bowl, and they're like, "You can hang out here, but it's probably not going to get kicked until later." So that's really what happened. Like you just went way early, and then you got there late.
Yeah.
You went to another party. You got distracted.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, similarly, my legal practice probably started in 2000. I guess it was 2013, 2014, 2014. And but initially, I was doing a lot of TradFi stuff, a lot of exchange stuff, but I was also doing a lot of fintech, and then gradually got drawn into digital assets. But it was just really, it just became sort of, it grew into my practice sort of organically. And then it was like, okay, well, I got to make the transition. So similar, but I was also, I wish I could say at 214, I just boom, digital assets. It'd be very different, right? But it wasn't. I was still trying to figure out, how to engage on Twitter, and Kraken seemed to me like, I was like, Kraken, like, how could I put my money with something that sounds like a sea monster? Just stupid stuff. So let's start talking about. There's a lot to cover here, and it's really intriguing. Let's start to do an introduction to digital asset regulation in the Middle East. But we got to break it down into pieces, because there's a lot of different pieces, particularly for somebody who's less familiar with UAE. So I guess we'll start off maybe with the regulators and the scope of their authority. And you can sort of, I'll let you sort of introduce and walk through them.
Absolutely. So in UAE, interestingly, we're a small country, but we have financial regulators to suit your requirements. So we have our federal authority, under which we have Securities and Commodities Authorities, ESCA, that with the name gives out the regulations and frameworks for all securities to be issued and commodity services. We also have 2 other financial free zones, which are one is based in Dubai, DIFC, Dubai International Financial Center, and we have ADGM, which is Abu Dhabi Global Market, based out of Abu Dhabi. Now, UAE overall, we are a civil law jurisdiction, but then to attract FDI and to make it more at par with what globally was happening in the financial space, these financial free zones were launched and they were allowed to follow common law principles and come out with their own laws and regulations, especially to suit the financial sector they were servicing in. So, other than criminal or penal offenses, which are still under the federal authority, these free zones pretty much work as an independent entity on its own. Now, in the digital asset space, we've been very fortunate to have all of them talking about it. Now, when I say talking about it, because we're still waiting for some clarity on some laws and guidances from some of them. But to start with, ADGM has taken the lead in 2017 with the guidance on what happens in for utility tokens or ICOs. In 2018, they came out what they called it OCAB at that point, which is operating crypto assets business. They came out with their complete framework for anybody who was to apply for a license for launch of a token or launch of an intermediary services or to issue securities. That is when you hear about almost 300 applications for crypto exchanges came to them. That's when companies like Kraken, companies like other big names, which we cannot take right now, but they came and applied to ADGM. Now, from 2018 to 2020, that 22, this framework has undergone many changes. Now we have a completely revamped regulatory framework from them. Sorry, with the even with the definition of how they define cryptocurrencies or virtual financial assets or digital assets, undergone the change as per the growing market and the growing changes in the tech. Now that's with ADGM. So they've pretty much taken the lead in this space. Then we also, from our federal authorities, Securities and Commodities Authority, in 2020, they came out with a framework for operating crypto assets. They came out with the law, they came out with a guidance note, and very interestingly, they defined different types of tokens as such. We had definition for what could be a crypto token, what do you mean by security token? What are you as a commodity token? What are you as a regulated commodity token or a recognized market commodity token? So very well drafted and thought about legislation.
And just to kind of even take a step back on this, so the SCA, Securities and Commodities Authority, that is the regulator for all of UAE,
Yes,
right?
it's a federal authority.
And then
Yeah.
it's a federal authority, and then within it, much like if you think about federal and states, or you think about Canada and provinces, or what have you, it's similar. You also have these regional, or in this case, these financial free zones authority, because that's what's attracting the digital asset community. And there's two of them, to my knowledge, right?
Yes,
There's maybe
DIFC
there's
and
more, but
ADGM. Yes,
there's what? I'm sorry.
there's
Yeah.
DIFC and ADGM. So Dubai International Financial Center and Abu Dhabi Global Market.
Right. So I just want to sort of set the stage, because as we talk about, uh, Abu Dhabi, global markets, and Dubai, each of them have a different regulator for that particular zone.
Yes. So we have these financial free zones, which are at par with any other financial regulator in the country. And they came out with these frameworks. So we had the federal authority, ESCA, that came out with the law in 2020. We have ADGM that came out with the framework in 2018, and they have amended that since then a couple of times. And interestingly, DIFC also came out with an entire framework in November last year for security tokens issuance. That if you're a digital security, sorry, then this is the framework that needs to be adopted by it. They've also recently come out with a consultation for the crypto assets framework. Now, we're hoping that before end of the year, we will have another law or regulation coming out from DIFC talking about different types of tokens issuance, as well as the different service providers in the crypto space. Now, interestingly, we did not stop there. In March, His Highness, the ruler of Dubai, also announced, and we have a law that came out which has now set up a virtual assets regulatory authority. The acronym for it is VARA, and that is going to be a bespoke regulator that will work with our federal authorities, with the ministries, with ESCA and central bank to come out with a bespoke framework for virtual assets altogether. So this is going to be a regulator working only in the virtual asset space. So it's not like now virtual assets licenses have to try to get accommodated or to fix themselves in an existing framework. A new framework is being drafted for them. So that is
And that
where,
would apply,
yes, that is,
right? And that would apply to the broader UAE as well.
yes,
All right.
that will be for the Emirate of Dubai and globally. So that is where you see FTX or crypto.com or Binance, Wobi, all these have come and applied for a license to start working here in Dubai or move their either move their global headquarters or move their regional headquarters to Dubai and help Dubai, and especially Vara, to put a framework together. So, so that's why we say now we have different regulators, and depends on what is it that you're doing, you could apply for these licenses. Now these are all for financial aspects of crypto assets. We also have another free zone, which is not a financial free zone but a free trade zone in Dubai called Dubai Multi Commodity Center, DMCC, that started issuing licenses last year for non-financial crypto companies. So if you are a DLT tech service provider and you help other companies issue tokens, you could apply for a license to this free zone. If you're doing proprietary crypto trading for just with your own assets, you could apply for a specific license with this free zone. If you're going to issue NFTs, you could apply for a license for it. And if you're going to be an NFT marketplace, you could apply for a specific license. So Dubai or UAE has taken this whole approach of not banning anything that they don't understand. They have taken this approach of we want more of these industry players to come to UAE and together we will create frameworks for them. So
Right. And so
TMCC has made a lot of progress in this space.
So from a lawyer on the outside, it's clear that, if you are contemplating, citing your business in UAE, you're not, to your point, you're not fitting in under a regime that's not applicable. You're not trying to interpret something and saying, is what I'm doing a security and having just that one Howey classification test. If I meet Howey, I go down the registration path. If I don't meet Howey, then I have to argue. And it's like, that's a very rigid framework. Whereas in UAE, it's like, what you need to do is you need to take that step back and say, okay, let me think about what I'm doing, and then which bucket do I want to go into, and have a regulatory structure. You're making a decision upfront, right? You're saying, okay, I'm not going into a broad fuzzy category. I'm going to a specific category. And within that specific category, the rules are going to be clear cut and there's going to be stability and I'm going to have clarity. That's sort of my read. I don't know if that's an accurate read.
Absolutely right. This is where UAE has been able to do it very differently from some of the countries, especially from United States, where you find out later on what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do.
Right,
you're always
right.
in a gray zone. But in UAE, the approach has been that from day one, when you come to UAE and say, this is what my business model is, this is what I plan to do here, either a financial regulator or a non-financial regulator will have the understanding of it and will be able to guide you. Okay, this is the license. These are your do's and don'ts. These are your disclosures. These are your minimum requirements. This is your capital required. This is the competence we require you to have. Mind you, initially when ADGM was giving out the license for a crypto exchange as a MTF or a multi-trading facility to function, they took around 12 to 18 months to give approval for an exchange. So it's not like, okay, you come and apply and everybody could get that. There is a lot of background work that the regulators have done with these companies before allowing them to start operating here. So this is where UAE gives you that clarity from day one. So that has been able to bring in a lot of stability and belief and faith in the regulator and the licensing regime in this space. It's not like,
Right.
and everybody who's applying here, there are requirements for them to have their core team based out of here, the capital requirements, the disclosure, the insurances, the policies, frameworks. It's very robust that they have to follow these before they start operating here.
Right. So somebody planning, is there like a sandbox? Let's say somebody wants to move to UAE, but they know it's going to take some time to get up and running before they can fully operate under the license, but they want to do some activities but 12 to 18 months by some measures could be seemed long. For other businesses, it could seem about right. How does that typically work? The ability to operate during that pre-license?
Yeah, so what we've seen, Eric, is that the most difficult license could take you 12 to 18 months. But if you're into the crypto business, there is always a possibility for you to start with a smaller project. Look at it something which a regulator is more aware of, and easier for you to start. So let me give you an example. Most of our clients came to us last year and said, we want to do over the counter trading facility for cryptos. Now that would be more like a trading platform, but then we know that the regulatory approvals for those could take time. But then the business model was such that most of them were acting as a principal and doing trading. So it's easier for them to take a non-regulatory license and work as a proprietary crypto trading company. So you set your foot here, you start working with those. Some of our clients in this space who were setting, and they said, while we are setting up the whole MVP or working on the technology platform, we want to move in our team here. We want to move our developers here. So then we have specific companies or licenses they can go and apply for, which is this is a DLT tech service providing company. So you're able to enter the space without any difficulty, and gradually you grow your business. That has so DMCC, I think, has more than 130 blockchain companies now operating out of that free zone, and with very different interests and offering their services not just to the local market here but across the region over here. So in that way, you can balance it out really well. If you want to apply for a highly regulated license and go for a 12 to 18 months process that it took, which is now considerably less because the regulators are far more evolved and developed in that space now, or you start with something simple. And then coming back to Sandbox, interestingly, both DIFC, ADGM, and even ESCA for that matter, sorry, has the provision for Sandbox. So currently, ADGM has just launched a sandbox for DeFi platforms because we did not have, and we still do not have any regulations or legal framework for DeFi companies. All DeFi projects were seen just purely as a banking or a financial institute function, very centralized system. But now, 3 months back, ADGM has announced that we are coming out with a DeFi sandbox. If you have a DeFi platform or a DeFi project, please come and discuss it with us, and we'll see if we can fit you in our sandbox. This was the same approach the IFC also took with a lot of fintech companies 3 years, 4 years back. And with that, we have seen a lot of companies maturing out along with the regulations that have come out.
Excellent. And would you say that right now UAE is probably the most active country in the Middle East that's attracting digital asset business?
Yes, we have another country. We have Bahrain giving us
Yep.
good example in this because Bahrain Central Bank of Bahrain came out with their whole framework for crypto asset service providers again pretty much at the same time as ADGM came out, and there it's a little different because it was coming from the federal authority, from the central bank itself. So the two exchanges in the Middle East that went live first year is by the name of Rain and CoinMina. Both were in a sandbox with Central Bank of Bahrain. So they grew in that sandbox for almost 12 to 18 months and then matured into becoming a full-fledged exchange operating from there. And now recently also we see a lot more new fintech regulations coming from Central Bank of Bahrain as well. It's across the region. You see many other countries also in GCC coming out with either consultation papers or frameworks for crypto assets.
And is the talent pool the greatest in UAE, or would you say it's distributed? Like if
Yes. So with DMCC coming out with these licenses for DLT and tech companies, we saw a lot of talent pool coming to UAE in the last 2 years, especially. We've seen a lot of them moving here. So with the large players moving in and moving their global headquarters here, we have seen a huge influx here. But it all started with DLT license and incentive programs, incubation programs launched by both Dubai and Abu Dhabi government.
Excellent, excellent. So maybe moving into the different definitions that are used within the regulatory systems, the definition of virtual assets and currencies, and how they break them down. So again, getting back to the comment I made about the buckets, right? Like you come in and it's not just like I got something and the SEC is going to tell me what it is and it's going to fall into one. Again, you have the ability to say, okay, what is it? What is the characteristic of this digital asset? And then you figure out what the proper regime is it, and that drives like potentially which zone you might situate in, and what regime you would get licensed under.
Uh, let me talk about ADGM or DIFC in their consultation paper, or even in their security tokens law, or ESCA in their law, or VARA. All have come out with the definitions what would be a token, what is a crypto token, what is a security token. And recently, in line with what are the FATF recommendations for the definition of a crypto virtual assets, is we have seen these amendments being made to the existing regulations that we had. So recently, like in VARA, which is the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, they've gone ahead and defined virtual assets to be digital representations of value that can be digitally traded, transferred, or used as an exchange or a payment or tools or investment purposes. This includes virtual tokens or any other value determined by the authority. Now, they've gone ahead and defined virtual tokens to be a set of rights that can be digitally issued and traded through a virtual assets platform. Then they've gone ahead and defined what will be a virtual assets platform. So all these clarification and explanations being given in every regulation that has come out. Now, again, in DIFC, they've gone ahead and defined a crypto token also includes any rights or any sorts of interest in the relevant crypto token. So we're talking about very broad definitions earlier, which were just stopping out that, okay, it's a medium of exchange, it's a store of value, or it's something that can be traded digitally. But now they specifically included that is it used for investments or are you using it for payments? So every project that we've looked at, we've asked these questions to our clients to see that what happens to this token. Now, in DIFC's consultation paper, because this is the most recent one that has come out, we've seen they've actually explained that if you are defined or approved as a utility token, which says that your utility is there only on a platform, but we see that that utility also is including payments to be made on that platform, then the definition of this token might change. If that token leaves the platform and is being traded on a centralized or a decentralized exchange, then again the definition of the token changes. So, sorry, this is the first time we've seen they've gone and saying that a token, and which is there in the tech space, we know that it's possible that you could be multiple tokens at the same time. So there is not just one single classification fitting for your token. So they have come up with the concept of a hybrid token. And they're saying that every time you as a token issuer or a service provider think that your token is changing the definition as per our regulations, come back and discuss it with us. And then we will see how do we fit in to the new definition. So we've just looked at that consultation, and that's where we were like, okay, this is a regulator who's now understood that it cannot be just, okay, saying you're a security or you're not a security, that you're just this utility token and you're nothing else. They're saying that you could be all of it. We have to understand and work with you to see what sort of disclosures and what sort of arrangements do we need to make and what sort of licenses that you need to apply for. So that's a very interesting concept. We haven't seen that globally in a lot of countries, that such an approach, but the IFC has taken that approach, and we're waiting for the final law to come out. You know, in our federal authority, in our ESCA, as I told you, we had clear definition of, are you an asset backed token? Is there a real asset? Is it like a real estate that your token is representing the rights or the economic rights in an asset? Then you're an asset backed token. If you're a traditional security, then you will be seen as a securities token. If your asset is backing commodities as per the definition of the commodities under the ESCA's commodities laws, could be agricultural produce, you could be gold, you could be any other commodity that's being traded, then you're a commodity backed token. So they've got to define these different classes of token based on the underlying principle that's being defined. So we had very interesting cases of discussion with the regulator on NFTs, because most of the jurisdiction we have seen gone and said that, oh, we don't regulate or we don't license NFTs, and you could do whatever. But UAE is again taken the approach and saying that, come and discuss with us what's the underlying principle, what is the underlying basis of this NFT? What is this NFT representing? Is it rights? Is it ownership? Is it a commodity? And then we talk about the fungibility and non-fungibility of the tokens.
Right. I think, in the US, you hear people talking about fractionalized NFTs and like, okay, that's a security. Again, that's our only bucket, right? It's either a security or it's not, or it's a commodity. A commodity is security, or I guess it's a currency. And each one of those could also be the other, depending on whether it's a future or a spot or what have you. Um, so then, okay, so there's different classifications for the token. There's a need to continue to engage with the regulators, depending on if you want the tokens to do other things or you want to have new tokens on the platform. But in each case, there's an effort to kind of say, okay, what is the appropriate license to it, so that when you actually do launch, you have some security, some clarity that, hey, I am regulated. I have a license. But I'm permitted. I'm not running. I'm not waiting for, Chairman Gensler to come on and say something again inflammatory, and I have to start restacking things and explaining things to my investors. So to now move to, we talked a bit about the tokens. Now let's talk about the platform, the platforms and the facilities themselves. There's exchanges, there's an AMI, an authorized market institutions, there's ATSs. I'm thankful that we're using exchanges and ATSs across the world because it's easier to kind of wrap my head around. But there are distinctions. Do you want to talk a little bit about each of those and how they might be different than even like the way the similarities and differences from what we might see in the US or Europe or what have you?
Yes, so in UAE, especially from ADGM and in DFSA, they have recognized that there are two types of, if we are to talk about ATS platforms, we have MTFs, multilateral trading facilities, that operate completely on a non-discretionary basis, or we have organized trading facilities that operate in a discretionary basis. We also have similar classification and definition coming from ADGM also. So every exchange that you've seen that has got license, I think 7 of them have the license to operate, and 5 of them have gone live in UAE. They have got the license to operate as a multi-trading facility, and it was mandatory for them to also apply for a separate custodian license. So because initially this was not the case, when an exchange was applying for a license, they were asked to apply for a license just as an MTF. But I think a year down the line, the regulator realized that most of them at some point end up having custody on the clients, either cryptos or on the fiat. So they made it mandatory for these exchanges to apply for a custodian license separately. And interestingly, we have seen both that ADGM and DFSA have classified and explained that in the regulations. And it's the similar approach that even ESCA has taken. So, and these are all here working pretty much as recognized investment exchanges. So it's not that, okay, they're dealing only in crypto assets. They could be dealing with derivatives, futures, CFDs, crypto assets, options, all of these under a MTF license. And this is the license which has taken initially a lot of time for them to give it out. But now we see more players coming into this space as well.
So can I ask, on the custody side, particularly with regards to the public blockchain, what is the approach of the regulators with regards to that? Because in the US, custody typically requires that you're maintaining. You have to have it has to be a good control location. So you have to have the tokens can't be really public blockchain. They have to be private blockchain, or else the custodian can't actually retain them. Now that's in the regulated context. There are digital asset custodians that hold the keys separately, but they don't and they fit under a trust structure, but they don't fit under the custodial regime specifically for regulated entities. How does the UAE handle that?
Now, so in ADGM specifically, we have the framework for digital assets custodians. So, what sort of blockchain can you use? What's the access you have to the private keys of the clients, and what safeguards have you kept? What sort of insurances have been made? What disclosures have been made? What's the capital requirement? All these have been provided at length, and this is one of the most, I would say, most difficult licenses to apply for. So it's not, and recognized investment exchange and a custodian license are not what we say easy or a license that anybody can apply for. And initially, ADGM and specifically in ADGM has taken this whole approach of being technology agnostic and saying that, okay, we're not looking at the technology, but we're looking at what's your overall solution. But over a period of time, we do see that they are now getting more and more in depth, even about the technology solutions that you are going to provide for. Who's going to do, if you are relying on third party service providers, their credibilities, your arrangements with them, their licenses, their regulatory approvals, all that is being checked and supervised over here before a final license is issued out.
But if you're if you operate an exchange and you have a custodian license, you does the UAE permit, with the requisite safeguards, you to be a custodian, again, as part of that regulated exchange for public blockchain tokens?
I will have to check that, but mostly yes, these have to be there.
Right. I mean, because it again, the whole notion of custody for public blockchain, raises some questions, at least under SEC customer protection rule in the U.S. And even the commodities CFTC regulations. Although I think CFTC's done it a little bit better. Okay, so outside of the UAE, we have Central Bank of Bahrain as probably the most, would you say, the most active outside of UAE in terms of digital asset regulation? So does licensing in one jurisdiction, is there reciprocity across the jurisdictions? How does that work?
So how does it work is that if you're licensed and regulated by Central Bank of Bahrain, it becomes easier for you to get licensed in other GCC countries. And it also, so I could be a Bahrain regulated entity. I can onboard customers from across GCC or the Middle East. What I'm not allowed to do is to go and promote my services directly, but I can onboard clients from there.
Okay.
Now,
And so so do the clients have to be like non-solicited, like you, because you said you can't promote directly. That means like if I'm in UAE and do they have to like geo block?
no, there is
Uh,
no geo blocking, nothing. You can onboard clients from across the region.
okay, so it's just how much they can do to try to solicit clients. Like if they open an office and they start saying, I guess opening an office would be a problem,
Yes, opening an
but
office will not be permitted unless they come and apply for a license here to do the same. Either open up a branch or open a rep office or apply for a different license to operate from here.
right. But if you wanted to access like a Bahrain licensed exchange, you could go online, pull up the site, and apply, and they would onboard you. And I guess and the UAE wouldn't say, well, you're onboarding one of my citizens as long as they're licensed. Okay, that's nice. We don't have that here. So and we talked a little bit about utility tokens. Um, how are those? How is the concept of utility addressed under UAE regulations?
So, interestingly, with one of the licensing authorities, we had a discussion yesterday where we were explaining a project, and they explained that, okay, till the token remains, and we were doing this whole project is for a metaverse project that a client of ours is launching, And they said, till the token remains in the metaverse, it will be a utility. It remains on that platform, and we understand that this is what it's used, even if it's for use for payment, but within the platform, it does not leave the platform. And very nicely, the licensing authority further explained, and they said that the moment it divorces the platform and it moves to a trading facility, we will see it as either a payment token or as a virtual asset, as a cryptocurrency. It will cease to be just being a utility token. So that's one of the licensing authority. I'm not even talking about a financial regulator who's come back with this response. So I think that's a unanimous, both with ADGM, with the IFC, VARA, ESCA, all of them being very clear on this, that the utility is, because in ESCA, in fact, sorry, we in under, just like utility token, we have rewards tokens. We have loyalty tokens, which are those, okay, customer loyalty points that you get, and those are given in tokens, but it remains within that ecosystem and it doesn't leave that ecosystem. But the moment it leaves that and there is any sort of, I don't want to use the term passive income, but any sort of investment or any other purpose that gets attached to that token, it ceases to be a utility token.
Right. I think I see a concept emerging from a regulatory perspective, I'd say across a number of projects, of this notion of a walled garden. Within the walled garden, the tokens have one property, and then outside the walled garden, they have another. And sometimes if you don't want that token outside the walled garden to have the same, a different property, or to cause the walled garden one to have a property like its security or a payment token, then you create two tokens, and one token becomes exchangeable for the other, and one facilitates the exchange out of the walled garden and has to worry about how it complies with the regulations in whatever jurisdiction applicable to it. But yet the tokens within the walled garden can operate without those same kind of constraints and complexity, and potentially have even a broader reach in terms of the participants that can engage with it. So, it's interesting to see. It's good that the regulators in UAE are sort of contemplating this, because again, like with so many other things, in a few years, all of a sudden you'll get regulators in the US saying, "Hold it, you have to. These are securities." It's just like, oh god, can we get out of these two bucket approach? Or three buckets anyway. But and I think EU might even be more complex in how they address some of these things, although it's hard to tell. It depends on the month, much like other parts of the world. Um, so um, I have so many questions to ask. Is the level of centralization relevant? I mean, I think you said it is relevant, that it's, now you're sort of broaching like the DeFi component of it. Absent that structure, the guidance that's being offered for DeFi, or are the degrees of centralization, do they factor into the regulations, or is it just that the regulations you have to have a certain amount of centralization in order to comply with the regulations, but otherwise the notion of centralization isn't really like, in and of itself something that is looked at by the regulators?
So initially, I could say that UAE has not been very open to completely decentralized ideas. So when we talked about BlockFi, we talked about DeFi, we did not have any regulators support in this 2 years back, or even a year and a half back, where they were very clear that these all have to be centralized exchanges, centralized platforms operating with the full control metrics being available and submitted and approved by the regulator before they launch themselves. Now, with the DeFi sandbox coming into place, it's still, I say, a long way for us to comment on it, that what those regulations could look like. But fairly going by how we've seen the regulators working in this space, as much as they're progressive, they still want to control. They still want to make sure that they are giving out the licenses to the right players. We will still see a fair balance between centralized and decentralized. I do not, in my personal opinion, do not see a fully decentralized system being allowed here at any point of time.
Except maybe DeFi, but then it's like, what are you regulating? Like, it's
Yes.
not to your point, it's, yeah. And I guess that's also good, because to say, well, we want to regulate the decentralized platform, it's like, well, good luck at that anyway, right? Yeah, you have to comply if I can find you. Um, so, and what about FATF? So, and this sort of does touch on maybe decentralization a bit because in terms of your clients, like so fully centralized system, like all the exchanges that are applying, obviously they're doing KYC, AML on all their participants. But maybe like your metaversal participants, maybe they don't want to have to go through KYC, AML. What is the view of the regulators in applying it? Is it like basically if it's a financial instrument, if it's seen as a payment token, FATF, and if it's not, if it's just like a utility floating within the metaverse, not, which is sort of basically what I would expect. But how is it like the gray zone?
We do not have a gray zone here. We are very clear with it. In the federal AML KYC laws of the country makes it a penal offense if you're not doing the AML KYC for anybody working in the crypto asset space. In fact, so much so, a couple of weeks back, we had the by public prosecution going out with the video explaining for anybody that you're operating here in UAE, it's mandatory for you to abide by all the laws and regulations, specifically AML KYC being done and to get the right license to operate here in UAE. It's not just a fine, but it's a penal offense if you're not following those. So if you see, even in the non-financial, even I've had calls with clients who are saying, but I'm operating in this country and I am not doing any AML, KYC. Why will I move your business to you? I said, maybe UAE will then not be the right jurisdiction for you because it will be mandatory for you to do proper AML, KYC. And it all like both for, so sorry, not just for ADGM, IFC, but even from ESCA and from VARA, the definitions are very clear that you have to abide by whatever FATF requirements are.
So, in the context of DeFi, then I guess the notion would be that the permitted DeFi platforms would still need to address how AML KYC is being conducted. Do they? I mean, have they contemplated things like blacklists as being adequate? I mean, if they're just looking at DeFi now, it's probably early in the process. But in your view, it is the sandbox approach to DeFi still contemplating full KYC AML on each participant in the DeFi platform, or are they contemplating like, yes, there may be ways to sort of preserve the privacy in the of the participants
I think
that
it's
doesn't
a
involve.
little primitive for us to comment on it because it's very recent that it's been announced. But in the other sectors, we've seen the frameworks and we've seen how compliance has been very strict on AML KYC.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the licensing process getting easier. I guess the 12 to 18 month would that be the long end for like in a digital asset exchange, a full blown exchange with custody, and then for other intermediaries lesser time.
Yes, and 12 to 18 months was a scenario 4 years back, 3 years back when the
Okay,
regulations had just come out. Now we're
you're like, Eric, get off the 12 to 18 months already, right?
now, Eric, I'm not.
So maybe you can give us maybe you can reset for us a little bit. Like, what timelines would you anticipate? And of course, it's always hard, right? Because I mean, I'm an attorney. I get people coming, they want to become a broker dealer, and they're like, "How long does it take?" And I'm like, "Well, are you ready?" If you're not
Exactly.
ready, then it's going to take a very long time to even apply. But if you're ready, 6 to 9 months for a broker dealer, maybe less, but that means you're ready. So it's very
Exactly. I
different.
was going to tell the same. It depends on the readiness of the client. We've got clients who come and say, but we're completely ready. And when we give them the whole document checklist and we say, these are the policies, this is the standards, this is what is being expected, they're like, whoa, we weren't expecting this. And say,
Yeah.
now let's talk again about, are you ready?
Yeah.
But both with our experience as a law firm with ADGM and DFSA or with Central Bank of Bahrain has been that the regulatory team is a very hands-on team. So from the time we submit, it does not take them more than 2 to 3 weeks to get back to us and say, okay, we've reviewed everything. Can we get on a call? Can we discuss it? So they're very interactive. So we always say that from our end, I can tell you because there's no definition under the law like they said that, okay, we have to do it in 4 months or 6 months. But if everything is there in place, they're ready, with the word go, then maybe 6 months, 8 months, but it all depends on your readiness.
Yeah, and that makes a big difference for planning. I mean, sometimes people say, "Oh, a year and a half, I can't handle it. It's too much. It's too far out." But in fact, like, and then they get approved in like 6 to 8 months, and they're still not ready. They're like, I need more time. It's just a matter of where you are. It's like it's too
Yeah,
far for planning, but in
yeah.
terms of
It's
executing,
an interesting. Right now, we have an application with the Central Bank of UAE, and this client was adamant that I'm gonna finish the whole application in 90 days. My team is ready. I have everybody on the ground here. And when we gave them the document checklist, it's 45 days. We still haven't heard from them. We as a law firm have these regular reminders going to them and saying, we're still waiting for the documents. The 90 days clock is ticking because our mandate gets over in 90 days. But
yeah, it's no different anywhere else in a large extent. It's a learning curve, and clients often have to go through the learning curve, and it's not even there's no fault. Um, so in applying to become a licensed firm, a lot of jurisdictions have a requirement that somebody be on the ground, right? And it certainly makes sense, but like some jurisdictions, you can actually operate with you have to have like one person, but like your compliance team can be outside. You just have to have that one single representative. But other jurisdictions, US included, if you just try to have like one person there and everybody else outside, it's doable. You're just going to get a lot of questions as to how can you really assure. But how does that actually play out in UAE?
no, so in UAE, especially in ADGM or DIFC, it's mandatory for you to have your core team, which would be your compliance, your CFO, your CTO, to be based here in UAE. Some of the functions they could initially allow you to outsource, but more often than not, in our conversations with them, our clients have been told, no, at least your compliance team, at least your CTO and your CFO need to be based here in UAE.
And in terms of staffing up around that, like if you have that core team in UAE, are you allowed to actually have your compliance? In other words, can you have your like a core team located in UAE, but like a larger supporting team outside?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
because I know
supporting
in
team, yeah, can be operational and functional from anywhere. You could be using a third-party service provider, but your core team that's functioning with the third-party service provider needs to be based here.
Yeah, because that's been a knock on Singapore. If you want to get a PSA license in Singapore, you have to have more than your core team. It's like you'll get a lot of questions as to why don't you have your whole team here? And you know, um, that's been a struggle for a lot of companies in Singapore who are hoping to get a PSA license. Just I mean, I think they've issued like three, and it's considered a friendly regime. I'm not sure my experience would. I'm sure it is. My experience my experience doesn't suggest it's all that friendly, but so but yeah, so you have that, you're able to get that core team. And then like in terms of like hiring those people, is it typical that people are going to say, okay, I'm going to take my core team from wherever they are and move them to UAE? Or how easy is it to get some of these core team members? Like, can like, is it easy to hire a CFO on an outsourced basis or
Yes,
a CCO?
it's not a very difficult process, and in the last 12 months, we had more than 20 laws being amended, and our main UAE labor law being one of those. So we had a very, I can now openly say it, a non-flexible labor law. But now we have various different forms of employments that one could get into. Like till these amendments came out, part-time or working as a freelancer or working on as a project consultants were not there under the UAE labor law. You could do it, but now all these are possible. So it's not just talking about one aspect. Overall, as a country, there are lot many amendments have been done to accommodate this newer area, this whole work from home, remote working, to be there in our legal system.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about Crypto Valley Labs, because I think something quite a bit about, and it seems
Yes.
it's like one of these, I guess, incubators, accelerators, but more than that, I guess it's a. Well, I'll let you expand on it.
So Crypto Valley, now it's called Crypto Oasis. This is an incubation program, which one of the free zones that I was mentioning you about, DMCC, Dubai Multi Commodities Center, they started this initiative, signed up in 2019, and last year in March 2021, they went live. And in that, they have been able to bring in a lot of talent pool, a lot of blockchain companies, foundations, and a lot of bigger players to move to UAE. And in that, there are incentives given by the crypto Oasis, like they've got a massive floor operating out of DMCC. So these companies could come and set it up. It's a one-stop shop where it's easier for them to set up their company, get the license, be in an ecosystem. They do a lot of these events. They also have these funds. Now they have Inacta, and they have also got one more fund whereby they work on an equity basis and fund these projects that are coming to Crypto Oasis. They also have this new VC fund, which is done quite well. It's a Dubai-based venture capitalist firm called Cypher Capital. They've just announced a $100 million digital assets fund. So all these are working from DMCC Crypto Oasis. And this license for proprietary crypto trading is something unique that DMCC started with Crypto Oasis, and they started giving out these licenses, and they have become very popular across the region. And so Crypto Valley, or Crypto Oasis now, has given that big boost to UAE in the crypto asset space.
If you're thinking about like coming to UAE, obviously you have to get good counsel to kind of figure it out, because if you want to be regulated, it's a great place, but you got to you got to know the ropes before you get there. We talked a little bit about Crypto Oasis. What are some of the more compelling zones for new enterprises to consider entering into? Like, obviously, there's we talked about AGDM. We talked about the
EIFC.
DIFC. I'll get this right, just it won't be on this podcast. DIFC, we talked about these. But like within those, there are like communities. Like I think, like just for example, like in Cayman, there's like the KEC, like the Cayman Enterprise, and they're like specific, like where you can get like your office space, you can get all the infrastructure, you can work with other people. It's like and it's specifically designed for foreigners to come in and to set up shop easy and get a lot of different benefits, including things like work visas. Everything's accelerated there. What are some of the similar projects that exist within UAE for that kind of
So
that
we've
kind of
got
entry?
many of those. So Crypto Oasis being the leader in this space, and their incubation program's huge, and they're specifically for blockchain and crypto companies. We have similar ones from DIFC. We have FinTech Hive, which has worked with a lot of fintech spaces. In fact, as you speak, DIFC FinTech Week is going on. It was yesterday and today, and you had to see we like more than consensus. We had more people crowded in one room just talking about different things that they could do in fintech and crypto. We also have in ADGM, again, we have Hub 71, again, working for startups and a lot of companies that could be in the tech space there. We also have different free zones, like we have In5 or Dubai Media City or Dubai Silicon Oasis, that also has these incubation programs for blockchain or crypto companies. Now, mind you, all these we're talking about Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but UAE has got 7 Emirates. So we've got the other 5 Emirates also. So now even in Sharjah, we have got these different free zones that have got incubation programs. One of the most popular one is Shera, which is again an incubation program to support fintech and companies in the technology space, not specifically for cryptos, but overall for technology. Again, we have other free zones in Ras Al Khaimah free zone. So interestingly, Ras Al Khaimah free zone and Ras Al Khaimah ICC. This is again a free zone in Ras Al Khaimah, which is one of the other Emirates here. And Abu Dhabi came out with a lot of licenses for great gaming frameworks. So if you're a gaming company and you're looking at moving your team here or having get them licensed, your players, like what needs to be done, they came out with a lot of licensing regimes. Then we have even in Fujairah, we have Fujairah Media City, we have Fujairah Free Zone. So all Emirates are working in this space, with Dubai and Abu Dhabi definitely leading this space.
Right. But if you're coming in from the outside, you definitely have to have so if you have to your top three that you have to look at, it sounds like Crypto Oasis, then the other one in DIF
DIFC and ADGM.
and ADGM. Okay. All right. And so we talked about so we talked about the government and the regulators that sounds like from your experience that they're fairly educated, that they understand the concepts. Is that would you say that, and you might be like, Eric, I'm not going to get myself into trouble here, but would you say that there's sort of a consistent, like if you're working with these different regulators, that there is a consistency in terms of the understanding? Would you say that it does vary by regulator? Sometimes you have to work a little bit harder. Um, are there ones that seem to sort of just get it more, that are just much more of a pleasure? I'm not going to say that because then that sounds judgmental, but that ones that are maybe just a little more steep, a little more active in the guidance and partnering.
So, at the risk of getting myself into trouble, I can I think the max that I can say is with ADGM or DFSA or CBB with the financial regulators. I must say our experience has been that the team's been very consistent. We've not had a situation where we've been said, "Oh no, you cannot do it." We've always had a discussion saying that, okay, explain more about your business and we can tell you where you fit into our system. Or if you don't, then what are the different options for you? Having said that, even with DMCC, because they have these not four licenses which are non-regulated, we've never had an issue where we've gone back to the licensing authority and said that this is the project or this is the client we're representing, and like they wouldn't reply. We've always got reply from them, except for there has been cases with some of one of the regulators where it's been difficult to get a reply from them, but with others it's been quite interactive. And this is the approach, I think, where it makes it very different is that it's not like they're reprimanding you or they're asking you come explain what you've done. They say, okay, we want to understand. The approach has been very different, so that has given the comfort to most of our clients in not getting scared that a regulator is calling you, but saying, okay, let's go and discuss what is it.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience, not in the U.S., but in like Bermuda has been just that
Yeah.
kind of regulator.
Yes.
That's what it sounds like. Um, so there's licenses for 30 exchanges being granted. Is there a high competition for the resources to staff those, or
Oh, oh yes,
yeah?
absolutely. It's a massive brain drain from one company to another, and we're in the middle of it, and we're not enjoying it. But as a law firm, also, even I'm holding on to my team and saying no. We're seeing a lot of movement around.
Um, and one thing I noticed was that Binance and FTX got licensed in Dubai, whereas Kraken got licensed in uh,
ADGM.
ADGM.
Yes.
Was
So here's the fundamental difference. So Kraken got licensed from ADGM as a MTF and as a custodian. So this is a license, and they worked pretty hard, and they've got the license. They can go live any minute. And with VARA, the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, that has given the regulatory permit to FTX or Crypto.com or Binance, is a regulator that is yet to come out with a regulatory framework. So what they've done is that they've taken what what our understanding of how VARA has operated so far is that they've taken the biggest industry players and taken them to sign a sort of an understanding with the regulator that you move your businesses here and we will together create a framework by us as a regulator understanding the whole crypto assets business by getting these industry players here, having their teams cooperate with them. So there is a huge difference between the license from ADGM, which is already coming from a regulator, and then what would come from VARA would be the regulations which we're expecting that they will have the regulatory framework by the end of the year or maybe early next year when we will have a guideline where then anybody can apply for that license. Currently, it's been more on an invitation basis that we want companies like the names that we've taken to move here and the regulator to work with their team in developing and drafting those regulations. It's not a sandbox, but it's a permit to see how they can all operate here.
seems like a good time to get involved, if nonetheless,
Yes.
with the regulators. Um, so let's take a step back and how your perspective on regulation in the US, regulation in Europe, regulation in Asia, and how it compares to UAE. What are your observations? What are the things that, when you look at that landscape, you say, wow, here are some key things that just sort of stand out as to how our approach is different, or, you know.
Yes, and especially with the recent consensus trip and my further US trip, I can confidently say that the approach UA is taken is very different from most of the regulators. So, like in US, we're still waiting for a regulatory clarity on day one for you to know what you're doing. You still either you this or that. That's it. There is no talk about accepting that the Hovi test is not meant for these new emerging tech space. This needs to be looked with a fresh perspective. That's the situation in the United States. When we look at Europe, again, Europe's divided in that. When we look at how Gibraltar looked at it initially and said, okay, we have 9 principles, and if you follow those 9 principles, you're licensed to operate. But then they stopped there. They did not go further from that. Then we looked at what Romania did or what Estonia did, where they said, okay, anybody can come and apply for a license and we'll give you a license. You take a e-residency, you do that, which was, it worked well for them, and no disrespect, but now they are coming out with a framework. Yes, they are realizing that if we give license to more than 300 exchanges, we now need to see how these exchanges are operating. Are they just on a mobile, or do we actually have any substance? Then we look at what FINMA did, what Switzerland or Liechtenstein has done. That they came out with a framework where everything needs to be accommodated to their existing securities laws and securities system. So, which is again a great approach, that we have the law, we have the framework for it, and a lot of companies and foundations and trust move their businesses and headquarters and what we say being in a more sophisticated jurisdiction. Whereas UAE, what they've done is that starting with ADGM coming out with a framework and comparing it to, so if you're a MTF, you are a recognized investment exchange. You could be doing any of the RIE, crypto assets being just one of the assets that your MTF is being is being traded. And then we have VARA, where we say that, okay, now we're actually going to create a regulator fresh from the start just to work in the virtual asset space. So that's a very unique approach, which we've not seen globally. In my limited knowledge and experience is this, I haven't seen any other country taking that stance and saying that, okay, not just create new regulations, let me create a new regulatory authority completely, which will deal only in the virtual asset space. So pretty much we can say we're very different from how other countries have worked in this space.
Well, I mean, I think UAE can actually pull it off, Vara. Whereas if the US tried to pull it off, it'd probably be a disaster. I mean, there's just simply like in theory it sounds, but it's just unworkable because of just the politics involved and the bureaucracies and the turf and everything else. There's just no way. Um,
Also, like
so
initially, like what's happening in India, like how they looked at it initially, they banned it, then they want to tax it, and
Yeah, no, I was actually going to bring up like Asia. Like has also had its growing pains. I mean, I talked a little bit about Singapore. India has been just sort of like, again, it's like you have to check every month whether you're
yes.
banned or permitted. That's not really conducive to starting up a business. South Korea seemed very friendly, although we have to see how the whole terror thing shakes out, and like the death squad being employed, and that's going to have an impact. Um, but UAE just seems, it's exciting. I'm excited, and I'm not even there, so I can only imagine for you. So we covered a lot in here. And there's obviously so much more to cover. I'm hoping this is not my last podcast on UAE. I'll have to pick your brains for other guests to bring on for specific to UAE. Before we break, like if somebody really wants to learn or get more steep, I guess going to a conference would be a great way. If what are the major conferences that are coming up in UAE for somebody who wants to just go and learn more and sort of experience it?
So we have this from DWTC, or the free zone, which mainly looks at VARA. We have this major conference called Future Blockchain Summit, which is supported by Dubai government. That's a massive one. Every year you've got like thousands of people coming for it, and that's like goes on for 1 week. It's a great event, and if anybody wants to understand what's happening in this space, and it's combined with what we have GITEX, and we also have a cybersecurity. All these conferences happen at the same time. There is also AIBC that happens, and like these 2 days, as I told you, we had the DIFC FinTech Week. Then there is ADGM FinTech Week that's there. So all these conferences are a good point for you to enter here and see what's happening in UAE. These are the major ones, and then other than that, we have like 30 to 40 other conferences which are just there across the year.
Right. Um, so if somebody wants to learn more about you, what you're doing, where can they find you?
On LinkedIn, on KARM Legal Associates, our LinkedIn page is there. I can share the details with you. We're also there on our website, which is www.karmadv.com. And also our newsletter is again something that we get a lot of requests for people to subscribe to it, because as a law firm working in this space, we make it part of our service that every 2 weeks we update our clients what's happening in this space. And,
Excellent.
and trust me, with UAE, with every week something new being announced, there's lots to be shared every 2 weeks.
I'm sure. I'm sure. So exciting times. Thanks so much for coming on. It was great to have you. And certainly hope to be learning more about UAE on this podcast. Thank you.
Yes, no, it's been an absolute pleasure, and it always makes me feel very proud of what UAE has done in this space. To go and talk about more in that, saying that a small country can make such a big impact in this space.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.